The world had barely exhaled from the white smoke rising above the Sistine Chapel, when the new Pope, Leo XIV, stepped forward, not just to bless the faithful, but to challenge the entire Church. He wasn't the youngest cardinal. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't even the favorite. But within 72 hours, Pope Leo XIV had become the most talked about pontiff in recent history. And not for what he wore, but for what he said. Pope Leo stood at the window above St. Peter's Square, sunlight illuminating his white cassock. And as millions watched across continents, he delivered a message that rewrote the tone of the papacy. This is not the time for maintenance. This is the time for mission. The Church must not whisper behind cathedral walls. It must walk boldly through the streets of suffering. Those weren't just words. They were the foundation of a radical vision. A blueprint. And it had 4 pillars. Pope Leo XIV made it clear. Mercy is not a slogan. It's our only relevance. Under this first pillar, he announced, an unprecedented global church audit of abandoned communities. Redeployment of resources from real estate to refugee care centers. Direct Vatican funding for initiatives supporting victims of war and trafficking. Global impact. Churches that once sat empty are now community kitchens. And used parish halls became shelters in Ukraine, Gaza, and Haiti. I've never seen this before. Rome didn't send rules, they sent food. And blankets. And people. The second part of Leo's plan caught the world completely off guard. If we do not go where the people are, we have abandoned them. With that, he announced the creation of the Vatican Digital Discipleship Initiative. A global media team, led by priests, nuns, and tech innovators, was tasked with building a global prayer app with AI reflection tools, establishing the first Vatican-backed creator studio for faith-based YouTubers, and most controversially, hiring former atheists to consult on religious communication. Twitter exploded. Did the Pope just go full influencer? Catholic Church plus content strategy equals wild timeline. If Leo XIV starts a podcast, I'm subscribing. I never thought I'd say this, but the Pope just made being Catholic feel like being seen. But the third pillar? It shook the walls of the Vatican itself. To ignore the voices of women is to turn our back on the gospel. In one of the boldest steps in modern church history, Leo XIV called for immediate inclusion of women in Vatican councils, expanded decision-making roles for female theologians, educators, and diplomats, a formal exploration committee on women deacons. While traditionalists gasped, the faithful responded with roaring approval. For decades we've carried the weight of mission without the power of voice. Today, something shifted. The fourth and final pillar? We must become a church that listens more than it speaks. Leo's blueprint included the creation of listening assemblies on every continent. These were spaces for LGBTQ+ Catholics, abuse survivors, interfaith families, ex-priests and former nuns, and those who simply walked away from the church. Not to debate, but to be heard. When I got the email from my local parish asking if I'd join a listening circle, I cried. They wanted to hear why I left. Not drag me back. Just hear me. That's when people started calling Leo's plan something more. Not a blueprint. A bridge. Social media lit up with voices from every corner of faith, age, and skepticism. A Reddit post with 12,000 upvotes titled, "This Pope actually listens. And I don't even believe." A Buddhist monk in Thailand tweeted, "The courage of Pope Leo is a gift to all paths of peace." A rapper with 50,000 followers posted, "Yo, the Pope is more radical than most politicians. Respect." Did he just dismantle decades of silence in 12 minutes? This man didn't tiptoe, he kicked the doors open. I'm not Catholic, but this feels like hope. But not everyone celebrated. Inside the Vatican walls, murmurs turned into meetings. Some cardinals warned. He's moving too fast. This could fracture tradition. It's not reform, it's rupture. Whispers of dissent echoed through old marble halls. One bishop anonymously leaked, "If Leo continues this course, he'll face real resistance. The kind that isn't seen, but is deeply felt. Every pope faces opposition. But few stare it down this early, this directly, and this publicly." And how did Pope Leo respond? He posted a single message online. "Let us not fear the shaking of old stones. It is how we find the light between them." The message went viral. Again. 5.2 million shares. Over 900,000 original posts. #LeoLight trending worldwide. Pope Leo XIV didn't just lay out a strategy. He held up a mirror. To the Church. To the faithful. To the world. He dared us to ask, what do we worship? Who have we ignored? And are we brave enough to change? The blueprint was announced. But now came the true test. Could the Church actually carry it out? Would the pillars of mercy, digital discipleship, women's leadership, and radical listening become more than poetic language? The answer was yes. But not in the way anyone expected. Within 10 days of Pope Leo XIV's announcement, the First Mercy Task Force departed the Vatican. Headed for refugee zones. Staffed by clergy and volunteers. Equipped not with doctrine, but with medicine, food, and translators. "We don't preach first," said a cardinal from the team. "We serve. We earn the right to be heard by loving first." These weren't photo ops. No gold rings. No press conferences. Just quiet mercy in forgotten places. We thought the world forgot us. But then came the Pope's people. Meanwhile, across Vatican walls, the world's most unexpected media revolution was unfolding. A TikTok influencer and former atheist from Brazil. A Franciscan friar who vlogged from remote villages. A young nun with a gift for poetry and spoken word. They were all invited to collaborate in what's now called the digital cloister. A sacred space with cameras, microphones, editors, and the mission to spread faith without fear. I am not here to impress you with scripture. I am here to remind you. You were never unworthy of grace. Within 3 weeks, clips from the digital cloister reached over 50 million views. Comments flooded in. I left church at 14. This pulled me back. Is this real? A pope who speaks TikTok? Why is this more healing than therapy? Pillar 3, Women in Leadership, was no longer a promise. It became practice. For the first time in history, a woman was appointed head of the Vatican's evangelization office. A female theologian co-led doctrinal reviews. A team of sisters were placed in advisory roles across dioceses. The Holy Father didn't just include us. He trusted us. He said, "Teach me what I've not yet understood." That's how you lead. Not everyone clapped. Some called it political. Others feared a slippery slope. But the results? Undeniable. A young Catholic from India tweeted, "My grandmother never learned to read. Today I watched a woman in a habit speak for the whole church. She sounded like fire and water. I cried." Of all the blueprint pillars, this one was the most revolutionary. Before we proclaim the truth, we must sit with pain. That sentence became the heart of a global movement. The listening circles. Each diocese was instructed to open anonymous spaces for honest stories from LGBTQ+ Catholics, survivors of clergy abuse, divorced and remarried individuals, ex-members who felt exiled. You have no idea what it means to be heard by the church I once loved. I don't want revenge. I want someone to say, "You're still a part of this family." These circles didn't always bring answers, but they broke centuries of silence. But change always threatens comfort. Anonymous letters began circulating. Leaked memos spoke of excessive decentralization, erosion of hierarchy, danger of populism. Some Vatican insiders began referring to Leo XIV as the disruptor in white. This pope is not reforming. He's detonating. Others hinted that there were internal alliances forming. Not to remove him, but to stall him. To slow his vision until it fizzled. His response? Another message. The Church is not a museum. We do not preserve power. We carry mercy. He wasn't just reacting. He was doubling down. And in his weekly Angelus address, he stunned listeners with this. The blueprint is not mine. It belongs to Christ, who turned tables, broke rules, and healed outsiders. If this offends power, so be it. The crowd erupted in cheers. Online, one user wrote, Leo XIV didn't come to please Rome. He came to resurrect Galilee. Young people weren't just watching. They were mobilizing. High school students in Nigeria hosted blueprint study circles. TikTok creators challenged each other to acts of radical kindness. An 18-year-old in Berlin recreated Leo's 4 pillars into an app called Faith Forward. It wasn't a movement anymore. It was a mission. We are the blueprint generation. Let mercy lead. Leo XIV made me Catholic again. At first, politicians dismissed him as a spiritual anomaly. Then came the headlines. Pope's mercy campaign reduces violence in border zones. Leo XIV's tech code adopted by UN Human Rights Council. Vatican becomes first faith power to host Global Ethics Forum on AI. The blueprint was being downloaded by the world. Even skeptical nations began inviting Vatican advisors to speak at human rights panels, educational reform summits, digital governance roundtables. Pope Leo XIV speaks softly, but his vision roars louder than governments. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not in our cynical age. Not in our fractured church. Not in a world that stopped believing in spiritual leaders. And yet, Leo XIV is doing what no trending topic, no politician, no billionaire has managed. He is making faith feel safe again. One woman posted, I didn't know how much I needed someone to remind me that love can still lead. Another, he talks like my grandfather, prays like a poet, and thinks like a rebel. I'm in. The world is no longer watching Leo XIV with curiosity. Now, it's watching with hope. The blueprint had escaped the Vatican's walls. Now, it was flowing through cities and villages, phones and hearts. This wasn't just a church plan. It was a global awakening. And it was far from finished. In his 3rd week as pontiff, Pope Leo XIV accepted an invitation to address the Global Summit on AI and Ethics in Geneva. What he said stunned even the most skeptical engineers. Artificial intelligence is not neutral. It is shaped by the values of those who build it. If we do not program compassion into our systems, we will automate oppression. He wasn't warning out of fear. He was inviting out of conscience. The Pope just gave the most grounded AI keynote I've heard all year. And I've heard them all. He didn't speak in Latin. He didn't hide behind abstractions. He said plainly, tech must serve the soul, not swallow it. And with that, the Vatican launched its new program, Dignity by Design, a global initiative urging developers, platforms, and governments to adopt tech standards rooted in human dignity, privacy, and equity. Under Leo's direction, the Vatican rolled out a suite of digital tools. Confess Plus, a private, guided reflection app endorsed by bishops. Ask a Sister, a global Q&A portal connecting youth with nuns worldwide. Church VR, immersive mass experiences for the elderly and disabled. One 17-year-old girl from Japan wrote, I attended Mass in VR. I haven't left my house in 4 months. But today I felt hugged. Another from Venezuela shared, I had never seen a nun before. Now I message with one every week. She prays for me. I cry. Every time. Is Pope Leo turning the Catholic Church into a digital sanctuary? It appears so, and the results are profound. But Pope Leo's vision wasn't limited to apps and live streams. He turned his eyes to the economy. In a surprise address called The Gospel of Enough, he said, A church that praises the poor but clings to wealth has lost her mirror. He ordered the Vatican to release detailed financial reports online, auction and use treasures to fund grassroots education and healthcare, invest in microloan programs for women and youth in developing nations. This was bought with a loan that came from the Vatican. Now I feed my family with dignity. It wasn't just a shift in money. It was a shift in meaning. Of course, such a sweeping blueprint didn't sit well with everyone. Conservative commentators accused the Pope of diluting doctrine, sowing confusion, chasing headlines instead of holiness. A viral op-ed in a European newspaper read, "This is not reform. This is rupture disguised in robes. Leo XIV's blueprint is disrupting power structures that have calcified for centuries. Naturally, they will resist. But the question is, can they stop what has already taken root in the hearts of the people?" Inspired by the Pope's pillars, a wave of local initiatives bloomed. In Brazil, young Catholics started street stations of mercy, offering food, music, and confession booths in poor neighborhoods. In the Philippines, thousands joined a blueprint-inspired movement called Church Without Walls, bringing Mass to hospitals, prisons, and construction sites. In France, an underground LGBTQ+ Catholic prayer group was invited by the diocese to lead Sunday liturgy. They wept. "We were always here," one member said. "But today, we are seen." And then, just when the church began adjusting to his new rhythm, Leo XIV did the unthinkable. He opened a live Q&A with youth from around the world. One question came in, raw and sharp. "Your Holiness, why should I trust a church that hurt people like me?" Leo didn't flinch. He paused. He closed his eyes. And then answered, "You shouldn't. Not yet. Not until we prove worthy again." The chat exploded. So did Twitter. And so did hearts. He didn't defend. He didn't preach. He didn't dodge. He just listened. And answered with truth. For centuries, many viewed the church as rigid. A gatekeeper of guilt. A museum of rules. But Leo XIV was reframing it as a garden of return. Not by abandoning truth, but by returning to its roots. Compassion over control. Humility over hierarchy. Faith as flame, not fence. It was that quote, he said, about God still whispering in the noise. I needed to hear that. In a letter released on Easter Sunday titled, "To the One Who Comes After Me," Pope Leo wrote to his future successor. One line stood out. "Do not build for applause. Build for the broken. And when they return, smell like them." This Pope made me believe I could serve without being sanitized. The blueprint was working. It wasn't trending anymore. It was transforming. By the fourth month of his papacy, it was no longer just a blueprint that had people talking. It was what was happening because of it. He hadn't just delivered a vision. He had unleashed a movement. In the past, the church waited for people to come to it. But Leo's blueprint flipped that logic upside down. Now, the church was coming to them. To refugee tents. To remote islands. To tech hubs. To TikTok timelines. They used to see us as priests of power. Now they see us as brothers with bread. All because this Pope said, "Meet them where they bleed, not just where they believe." In Canada, a parish removed its doors permanently. In Brazil, a church replaced its pews with round tables for open dialogue. In Italy, Pope Leo himself gave permission for a synagogue to use a Catholic chapel during renovation. And when asked why, he said, "God does not fear sharing space. Only the insecure do. They didn't ask me to convert. They just let me grieve in peace." One of the most courageous elements of Pope Leo's blueprint. His demand for truth-telling. He declared that every diocese must host independent truth panels, survivor-led healing services, open archives for historical abuse cases, For the first time, I stood on a church stage. Not as a victim, but as a witness. And they didn't silence me. They thanked me. Healing won't happen overnight. But Pope Leo's blueprint turned silence into soil, where trust could begin again. This wasn't just about Catholicism anymore. Synagogues, mosques, temples, and humanist communities began referencing Leo's 4 pillars in their own renewal plans. In Malaysia, a Buddhist temple began hosting digital wellness workshops. In Ghana, a Muslim community launched a Listening Friday circle. In Chicago, interfaith youth created a mercy wall, where strangers could write anonymous apologies and blessings. One line stood out. Inspired by Pope Leo XIV. Mercy is our new mission. Every vision has a cost. Pope Leo's was no different. His reforms ignited revival, but also resistance. Rumors swirled of internal power plays. Some bishops boycotted his initiatives. Traditionalist factions tried to discredit his team. And still, he pressed on. Not out of pride, but out of promise. You are not being ordained into comfort. You are being ordained into chaos, sacred chaos. And from it comes creation. In one of his most moving public moments, Pope Leo stood before indigenous leaders and did what many had begged of past pontiffs. He said, "We sinned against your ancestors. We baptized you before we blessed you. We colonized what we should have consecrated. For this, I am sorry." There was no applause, just tears. And then a child walked forward, hugged the Pope, and whispered, "I forgive you." That image was shared 100 million times. And historians say it did more for church credibility than 20 years of prayer. Suddenly, churches began to sing differently. Not just Gregorian chants, but lullabies from Ethiopia, psalms from Palestine, poems from Harlem. Liturgies now included mental health meditations, public